Tears of the Kingdom is not a sequel to Breath of the Wild.
Well, kinda.
And I'll be the first to admit, I honestly have had a really hard time writing this video, mostly because I didn't want to just rehash pretty much the only popular topic here on YouTube about Tears of the Kingdom, and it's mostly negative, and I'm going to be a little negative, but I'm not going to be as bad as other people. I'm going to keep trying to add good things on top of the bad things that I think are in these titles, but I really wanted to just go ahead and jump right into it. And I wanted to just go ahead and elaborate a little more because I don't want this to become an argument about whether or not these are actually good games, because I think we can all agree that objectively these are both very solid titles and you can very easily put 50 hours just about into each one of them. Now, I'm sure Nintendo didn't necessarily expect folks to play these games in tandem back-to-back quite like I did, but while sitting through both sets of cutscenes, both sets of dungeons, if you could really even call them that, almost identical sets of enemy variety, and quite literally the exact same map, I had to step back and I really took both titles in, and it kind of hit me like a truck, but I think Tears of the Kingdom is more adjacent to a sequel like Black and White 2 than it is to maybe, say, I don't know, The Last of Us Part 2? And shout out to Kyler360 for putting out that wonderful Last of Us 2 video. It really helped me narrow down my idea of what a proper sequel is. Neil Druckmann made a conscious decision to name The Last of Us Part 2 Part 2, and I grew admittedly obsessed over that idea. So, how is this a bad sequel, Fookuh? Well, I was meaning that more in the traditional sense. I brought up Pokemon Black and White 2 before because, like Zelda, the original and its sequel share a lot of the same DNA. Traditionally, alike with every sequel that should be, it's a steady reflection of what came before it, and what should be, hopefully, an improvement upon it. Now, luckily, to be fair, there wasn't a lot that needed to be improved between Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, pretty much other than just straight gameplay. The mechanics are pretty much just as sound as they were before. Link is just as satisfying to control. The climbing mechanics are just as satisfying to go ahead and overcome once you do reach a specific amount of stamina, which is also a welcome addition back. I've loved the stamina wheel since Skyward Sword. Go ahead and cancel me. But unfortunately, that's kind of where my short list of compliments ends. Now, the shared DNA between these two titles isn't always a bad thing. I'm trying to go ahead and picture that in a positive light, but it is still shared DNA, and if you can look past the new-ish content that is in Tears of the Kingdom, you will very quickly realize that it is still fundamentally the same map, it is still the same world with the exact same NPCs, and the exact same terrain. Once you've explored one map, you haven't entirely explored the other, but you've done just about all the legwork that you needed to do. And I'm really going to go ahead and pivot here onto why this is kind of a poopy bad thing, and I know what I've been talking about a majority of the portion of this video has been its mechanics, but honestly, what's mechanically brought over is just about the best thing that is in Tears of the Kingdom, and you do have new abilities. You are not given the exact same tool set, so that is a positive differentiator between the two games, so it does give you a reason to go back and play one or the other. So I will give the game its flowers when it deserves them, but I'm gonna start talking about why it kind of exhausted all of the positivity that I can muster, at least right now. I tried explaining a bit more about what I think it takes to be classified as a proper sequel, and what I really thought about was 1, mechanics, 2, gameplay, and 3, general visual design to kind of bring some type of cohesion, right? I'm also really not in the camp of Tears being a $70 DLC. In fact, I actually think it's far from it, but I'm also not too close to thinking it stands just as well as its own product. And I know comparison is the thief of joy, but I wanted to point at some other titles and kind of compare what I think share a similar syndrome. Mario Galaxy 1 and 2 come to mind, both Sony Spider-Man games, and pretty much Assassin's Creed, all of them actually. And I don't want to feel like we're just running around in circles, just pointing at different games to try and drive home a point that these games are essentially just more of what we've already had, and that's not always necessarily a bad thing, but in terms of this specific case, I'm trying to point that out that it is kind of a negative. But I have one more piece of info that I kind of want to drive this home with. In June of 2019, we got this image. I was ballistic. And I don't mean ballistic bad either. I was probably the most hyped I'd ever been for a video game in my entire life. So trust me when I say I wanted to blindly glaze this game and call it perfect, but that image alone gave me a false sense of hope that maybe, just maybe, Nintendo would elaborate on pre-existing lore and finally answer some of the questions we had laying over from Breath of the Wild, and I was expecting a sequel, damn it! But instead, what we got wasn't a DLC, wasn't a whole new world, wasn't as groundbreaking as an experience like Bigger Brother was, but we still ultimately got a damn fine game, and I still very much had fun with Tears of the Kingdom. I'm not saying it's a bad time. Lack of a cohesive story, reused game assets and mechanics, an abandonment of key iconic Breath of the Wild staples in favor for a falsely changed Hyrule, with the same points of interest and lack of anything worth exploring that it's new, other than really just for exploration's sake, or if you're interested in fighting bosses. But it has to be said, supposedly this game took a year alone worth of delay just for polish, and look, they had to deal with COVID, so I'm sure there was a bit of a time crunch that's a little different than previous, but I can't help but mention that Nintendo's done this before. They have been in this exact same situation. Hell, they did it with the same franchise. After 1998, Nintendo had an issue on their hands. They had to somehow follow up Ocarina of Time out of all games, and by God, they did it. In about a year, no less, and I really don't mean to compare apples to the goddamn Mona Lisa, but are you starting to see my point a bit? Using largely reused assets and an old engine, they churned out a direct sequel to the best game of all time. At the time. This is what a proper sequel should be. From the start, it's established that this is the same Link that once kicked Ganon's ass all those moons ago. It's truly only so much as implied that we are the same Link as in Breath of the Wild, and I mean, more than half of the cast doesn't even acknowledge your previous adventure, unless it's directly from cutscenes that would otherwise make no sense without that context. But even then, it can completely stand on its own without any of the context that we get from Wild. They're largely completely different stories, and I think that's a damn shame, especially because I feel like there might have been more story to tell, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe a sequel doesn't necessarily need to have anything to do with an original game, but for me personally, I felt like this title was marketed directly as that sequel that I had been wanting so much, and to see Zelda kind of go Persona and ditch what they had going on before, especially for what was supposed to be called a direct sequel, to me personally was just a bit disappointing. Yeah, so anyway, what's the big hoopla? Why am I talking about this? Well, mostly because it's been on my mind for the better part of a year, and I'm thinking we need to maybe start critiquing this game a bit differently, and I know the $70 price tag doesn't help its case pretty much at all, but I still put 200 hours into this game. I had another 400 in Breath of the Wild, and I played them over again just for this video and for footage, but what I am saying is these aren't bad games. Far from it. Tears of the Kingdom is not a very good sequel to Breath of the Wild in terms of its story. If you want to say it's a great sequel because of its mechanics, honestly, won't fault you too much. But what I will say is that at the end of the day, we can all agree they're terrible Zelda games. Anyway, that's all the time I've got. You guys have a great day. Thank you so much. Subscribe. I am Fookuh. Bye-bye!